Hello everyone, welcome to my talk. It's such an honor to be presenting at PyCon Ghana 2022, and I'm privileged to be here to share my knowledge on open source, and I hope you get to learn one or two things and maybe be able to contribute to open source. So I will talk about what open source in Africa, different ways you can contribute to open source, the umbrella and its efforts in open source, and then we'll have a question and answer session. Little bit about me, I am Beryl Kanali. I have a Bachelor of Science in Mathematics and Computer Science. I am a data scientist and statistician. I live in Nairobi, Kenya, and you can find me on Twitter and LinkedIn as Beryl Kanali. Now, what is open source? So if you're talking about open source, then we might try and define open source. So open source software is code that is designed to be publicly accessible to anyone. So anyone can see, modify, and distribute the code. We also have that open source software is developed in a decentralized way and collaborative way, relying on peer review and community production. So here the keywords are accessible to anyone and decentralized and collaborative way, where you have other peers who are maybe more experienced, I review your contributions, and as a community, then we will have worked together to build a certain library or software. Now, as Africans, let us look at the state of open source in Africa. So this is from a report done by Research ICT Africa. This is part 2 of their blog, where they wrote about a quantitative analysis of open source contributions. From this, you can see that there has been an increase in the last 10 years from 2010 to 2020 of contributions and GitHub users in Africa. Even with that increase, we really still form a very small portion of GitHub users and contributors in Africa. And now let's find why that might be the case. Some of the challenges that face open source in Africa include lack of good digital infrastructure. We know that in some countries and some places, good internet is an issue, electricity is an issue, getting knowledge in tech is an issue. We also have accessing hardware like a personal laptop or a computer is an issue. So we have poor digital infrastructure. It has improved over the years, but there's still more to be done. So this is one of the challenges that face open source in Africa. Another challenge is lack of knowledge and information. We know that open source is not really talked about, and it has started being talked about recently. There are more people are talking about open source. So we need to have more knowledge and information out there on open source to be able to have many people contribute and have access to open source and see what is being done in that field. We also have a skills gap. As Africans, not many of us are contributing to open source, maybe because we don't have the relevant skills to contribute to it. And again, tech has been increasing, tech skills has really increased over the years, and it's continuing to do so. So we hope with that the skills gap will get now narrower, and we'll have more people with enough skills to contribute to open source. Another thing is geographical bias. From the ICT report as well, it was reported that it is easier for you to get a reviewer, do the work, and do it timely and effectively if they're from the same geographical location. Things might include language barrier. Maybe you don't try to speak English that well. Maybe you're from a French speaking country or Portuguese speaking country, and maybe most of the reviewers do not speak that language or come from a country that don't speak that language. Another thing might be time difference. The reviewer might be living in a country that is 14 hours apart, and the time that maybe you might need help, they'll be busy, and maybe they're asleep, and the time they're awake, you're asleep. So sometimes there's that geographical bias, but with internet making everything very easy, we hope that it gets better. Now, how can we contribute to open source? So first we'll learn about the importance of open source. Why should we even contribute to open source in the first place? So the first pro or importance of open source is deep understanding of code. If you get to see a library that you use, if you get to see it in a repository and the code behind it, you might be able to actually understand better why some things act the way they act or do the way they do. So it's really good if you're able to see the code, learn it and how it works, and that is why you're able to use it and have a deep understanding of it and maybe make you better at using that language or using that library. Another thing is it promotes innovation, given that many different people are collaborating and working on a certain library or software. It's easier to get new ideas that another person might not have thought of if they were working on it alone. So we'll have new ideas, new libraries come up, new issues raised, new features, and that would really help. Another important is lower cost of software. If someone is working on software alone, or maybe they have to hire people to look at the software, fix issues with the software, upgrade it and everything, it might be very costly. And if they were to now sell the software and they have to counter and look at all the costs they used to put it all together, it becomes a little bit expensive to the users for us to be able to buy and have access to that software. Another thing, it will be easy to maintain and upgrade software, same as innovation. If there's a bug in a software and someone else sees it and raises an issue, it will be easier to maintain and fix that bug. Also updating software, you might choose something and you're like, okay, maybe it needs something else, it needs a certain feature. You might be able to suggest that to the developers and they might work towards upgrading the software. Now to skills, what do I need to be able to contribute to open source? So one, you need a GitHub account. This is because 98% of open source projects are hosted on GitHub. And it would really help if you have a GitHub account just to be able to view them, see them, fork them, work on them, make contributions, raise issues, and talk to the different maintainers. So having a GitHub account is one step to contributing or closer to contributing to open source. Another one would be basics of Git. Most of the time we use Git, so you'd have to know what a pull request is, what a branch is, how do I create a branch, how do I work with it, how do I collaborate with others using Git. So just having the basic knowledge, you don't have to be a pro at it because some of these things you learn as you go. So it's important to have the basics of GitHub, and this information is widely available on the internet. You can check that out. And as you grow, if you're interested in maintaining or contributing to code, you might have to know a programming language depending on your interest. So for example, if you code in Python, you might really have to understand Python, and then you'll be able to contribute to libraries and software related to Python. The same too, if you're using Java, Rust, Julia, any other language, that is very important in the work you do, or it's something you want to help by contributing to it in the open source space. So that is one of the skills you might need. Now, after you have those skills, how can you now contribute to open source? Open source is really thought of as code most of the time, but there are really very many different ways you can contribute to open source, even if you're not good at coding or not comfortable with it, or you just want to contribute in other ways, you can still do that. One of the ways is documentation, which is good for folks who don't have so much knowledge in coding and they want to really help. So you can contribute to documentation, that is reviewing documentation, adding some bits to the documentation, upgrading the documentation and stuff like that. The other way is contributing to the code itself. Another way is testing. For a software to be fully functioning, it must be tested. So you can test a software and now report back to them and say, I found this as something that is very important and it's not working the way you thought it should work, and ask questions and give ideas. That is one way. Another way is by reporting bugs. As a user, it's easier for you to notice a bug because sometimes the person maintaining it might not see, the developers might not see. So you can report bugs as a way of contributing to open source. You can create issues. Issues might be report a bug by creating an issue, create an issue of a suggestion of a new feature, or create an issue of, I want to ask about this and have a discussion about this. What are your thoughts? So you can do that by creating an issue on GitHub. The other way would be creating material related to a software. Every time you want to use something new, you always Google or go to YouTube and search, okay, how do I do a pull request? How do I use a certain software? Is there documentation for this software? So if we're able to create material, for example, a video, a blog, an article, just explaining some basic stuff or advanced stuff, depending on your knowledge, that is one way of also contributing to open source. You can also organize open source events like the way PyCon Ghana have done. We are here to learn about open source software and how we can contribute to it and probably have a career in the open source space. So organizing open source events is another way. If you're an organizer or you run a community or you run a club, this is one of the ways you can also contribute to open source. So as you can see, we have like 7 different ways and even more that we can contribute to open source. So if your idea of contributing to open source was only code, now you have other ways that you can contribute to open source. Now let's go to Data Umbrella. We are here as Data Umbrella and we are a community partner with PyCon Ghana. So Data Umbrella is a community for underrepresented persons in data science and we are a non-profit organization. Our website is dataumbrella.org and Data Umbrella is run by the following people on the screen. So you can see Reshma, who's the founder and the executive director. And then we have Christina, me, Sandy, and Sandra, who work on the background from creating the events to sharing them, to marketing them, to helping in open source and stuff like that. So that is what we basically do as Data Umbrella, and we are really involved in the open source space. How can you connect with us? So you can connect with us through our email. So our email is info@dataumbrella.org. We are on all social media platforms. You can join our Meetup. Our Meetup is very active. We do like 2 events per month or more. And that is where you'll get information to events. We also have a YouTube channel with very interesting libraries. You can check out libraries in a career in data science, contributing to open source materials, videos on different programming languages or on topics to do with data science, machine learning, and AI. So you can check that out and subscribe to get notifications whenever we post a video. You can also subscribe to our newsletter on Substack, which is dataumbrella.substack.com. And we always have 1 newsletter per month, so we don't spam you with so many emails. We also have a job board where people share and get to share with the audience of Data Umbrella the different job opportunities that are there, so you can also check that out. Now, what have we done in the open source, or what do we do in the open source? So in the open source space, so one of the ways we also contribute to open source as Data Umbrella is organize open source sprints. So we have done an African and Middle East sprint, 2 of them. We have done a Latin America sprint. We have done Scikit-learn and PyMC sprints. So these are just like hackathons where I invite people and they get to contribute on different issues. And we also try to factor in the different time zones so that if you're in very different countries, we have everything for everyone and you can contribute. Another way is organize events and talks in open source. So events, like we can have an event on contributing to PyMC, which we have a video on our YouTube channel. You can check that out. So we have a library on contributing to open source on YouTube. of the events we have done before and the talks we have done before with experts in the industry. So that is another way we contribute to open source. And then we share material related to open source. We have blogs. If you go to our website, you can see the blogs. We have blogs on open source, and we also have videos. As I said, our YouTube channel has so many videos, and you can get to learn a lot from them. Now, if you are a beginner, as we wrap up, if you're a beginner and you want to get into open source, so these are the tips that I would like to share with you. One would be responsible when contributing to open source. Just because open source is accessible to anyone doesn't mean that we get to be responsible. Open source has really a lot of things, and given that a lot of people also contribute to it, it is very good to be responsible so that the other people who are also working on it might have like a good time. So read instructions and follow them. Most of these repositories have instructions. Follow the code of conduct. Each organization have their code of conduct and what they expect from you as a contributor. Please look at that. Don't just start contributing before you read instructions and follow the code of conduct of a certain organization. If you're going to their repository, you'll find all those things there. Be patient. Open source is mainly run by volunteers, the reviewers, the maintainers, etc. Most of them are volunteers, so they might have full-time jobs on the side, and they might not really answer you immediately. You might make a contribution and you're like, it's how many hours and I haven't gotten feedback. Just be patient. Understand that in a collaborative space, there are many things to consider. Maybe there's a high number of contributors and a very low number of maintainers. So they have to balance and make sure that they review everything. So be patient. Some things might not be done immediately. It takes a while. So just learn to be patient with the maintainers, the other contributors, and the developers. Open source is also about learning. When you go to open source as a beginner, you know nothing, but as you continue, you get to know different things. And as tech grows, things change. And also personally, you might think, oh, I know this. And then it turns out that you don't really know it, or it has changed, or you did not know some aspects or parts of it. So be open to learn, ask questions. If you know experienced folks that are out there, ask them questions, ask them how you can do A, B, C, D. So it's really about asking for help and trying to figure out your way and being comfortable with what you're doing. Anyone can get into open source. Given that open source is accessible to everyone, it means anyone can get into open source. So don't feel like you don't have the right skills to get into open source. We have seen the different ways you can contribute to open source. You can be a technical writer and still contribute to open source. So don't feel like you don't have the right skills. You might be a beginner, but just do what you can do. Do something you're comfortable with as you learn and increase your knowledge in open source. Lastly, is more people are needed in open source. Everything is growing now around the world, and we don't have enough people working on these issues, getting these things done. So it's really good. If you're interested, please join the open source space. There's plenty to be done, and there's plenty you can do and contribute to. So these are the tips I would give a beginner in open source, or you're starting out or trying to figure out how can I get into the open source space. So with that, our recap is we have defined what open source is, and now all of us know what open source is, the state of open source in Africa, and we still have a lot to do. And we are also going in the right direction if we continue growing. The different ways you can contribute to open source. Open source is not all about code. Look at the different ways, find something you're comfortable with, and start doing that. The umbrella and its efforts in open source. As the umbrella, we're really trying to help the open source space and do as much as we can, collaborate with many communities as we can. So look out for any material that we might post on open source or any events we might do on open source. Also, we have the tips for beginner contributors. So feel free go through them. It takes some time to get a grip in open source. And open source has a lot of opportunities. Of late, people are now earning and getting money through open source. So feel free to start now contributing. It's never too early, it's never too late. Start now and feel comfortable with what you can do. And with that, that's a wrap for me. If anyone has questions, it will be a good time to ask now. And it's really a privilege to be here and present to everyone. I hope now you have some knowledge and an idea of how you can get into open source. Thank you.